For those of you who don't know me, I'm Melanie Schemberger. I took over as the interim director for the Faculty Development Center. I am proud to say that we should hopefully soon have a new permanent director. So that's all I can say at this point. But we're going to go ahead and get started because I'm trying to be mindful of our panelists' time as well as your time. Some of you, many of you probably recall 4 or 5 years ago going through your new faculty orientation sessions. And probably one of those sessions at that time, a couple of months after the semester started, was the introduction to tenure, to the whole process. And of course, to the first year, faculty, it's daunting. In a lot of ways, you have it in your head, but then it's just still in the back because you're thinking, well, I've got 4 or 5 years to work on this. The time is kind of approached now. So now that you are approaching your tenure deadline, whether it be next year or in 2018, it's now probably the time to start getting some things organized. And this is what our panelists are going to help us do today, to talk about maybe some of the challenges that they faced in putting together their materials, as well as maybe some guidelines. I know Dr. Hinton has some good anecdotes to share as to how she did it. So she's been helping us in our department. But let me introduce to you who is up here so that way you know who's who. Starting at my right, which would be your left, is Dr. Samir Patel. And then this is Dr. Marcy Hinton. I'm going to skip over down here to Dr. Michael Flynn. And then Dr. Danielle Nielsen, she put in her tenure documents this year. So I thought it would be great to have her, that way a lot of her insights will be probably really fresh. Not that theirs aren't, but she would definitely have more of a newcomer, I guess, insight into this a little bit. And the other 3 have been tenured in the last 2 to 3 years. Is that okay? Okay, good. So I'll just kind of start us off. I have some questions that I created, but at any time, feel free to jump in. Okay, so I'm just going to start, facilitating it. So this is for our panelists here. Okay, so since faculty attending, all of them will be applying for tenure really, really soon. What are some things they should or need to know? Michael, start with you, or do y'all just want to jump in?
Should or need to know?
Yeah, right now.
Well, can I ask a general question? I'm a little bit naive about. I'm in the College of Science, so for those of you who share the same, you probably go through a very similar process. But does every school and department, is there annual reviews every year for everyone? You've all been through that, okay. One thing that I'll add, I don't know if this is something you need to know or maybe a tip. Obviously, you're about to go up for tenure and promotion, so it's a little bit late for this, but this tip, I guess,
you're
is
doomed.
That one thing that I found in that compiling my packet, there's a lot of things you think, oh, this is something I need to remember to put in my tenure and promotion packet. As that, whether it was the second year I was here or right before I went up for it. The advice I was given by one of my colleagues was that, keep, whether it's an email or whatever it is, this little folder that you just throw everything in that might be usable. And granted, digital measures sort of forces us to sort of keep up with that, but I don't know, I found that my biggest challenge was that there were a lot of things that I didn't do that great of a job. And I'll admit I'm a terrible accountant, historian, bookkeeper, whatever. So I spent a lot of time like, oh yeah, I need to get this in there, and that process would have been a lot easier had I just been a better record keeper, sort of my own, what I've accomplished. And I don't know if that answers the question at all, but I don't know. Someone else help me out.
No, I think you're right on in terms of, for me it was a digital measure. So my record keeping was digital measures. I think that. I didn't really understand the point of it when I first got here, because we had a annual review process in the College of Education, but then we also had a merit sort of review that occurred as well. So we had 2 reviews every year, and the second review that occurred was a digital measures review, and so I felt like the first review was fine, but why are we doing this digital measures thing? But then when I started putting together my dossier, the digital measures was super, super handy because I have to update that thing every year, and so it forced me to reflect on the year that I had and update everything from alterations of my courses to, of course, scholarship sort of stuff, but then leadership positions and just providing a quick narrative of those positions in terms of committees that I served on and things of that nature, how much I served on those committees, what my role was on those committees, and so having that in a place somewhere became super beneficial come time to write the narratives for the tenure promotion dossier.
Anything else, Deb?
Compiling really took the most time, and finding things. So my department doesn't do the ABC reports during our annual evaluations. And so for me, going back and doing all of the ABC reports and fighting with the Excel document and making sure the equations were working, which they weren't, is what took the longest amount of time, because I had to start at the beginning and do all of that. All of the information was there because our grades are in MyGate and it's really easy to find, but I spent probably the last 2 weeks of May this year printing things off, copying things, and putting stuff into either spreadsheets or the sheet where we compile all of our evaluations, and moving the evaluations onto MyGate and not in paper copy is going to make things a little easier for you. You'll have fewer paper evals that you have to track down, but compiling is really what takes the longest.
Can I add something? You prompted something that one thing that I would recommend is that you talk to, whether it's your chair or maybe even dean, about what the actual package should look like, because so one thing that I did was I thought I was being all crafty, and I put all these little tabs and divided it so everything was nice and neatly organized. The first time I submitted it, I had it double-sided. And before I even got back down to my office, my department chair, or the tenure committee, the chair emailed me and said, hey, this has to be single-sided. I didn't know this.
Oh, wow.
So it took me too much time, whatever, I did it. But then I was like, okay, well, look at all these handy, nice colored and whatever else, and I printed them out on a typewriter. And, they wanted, they photocopied them and distributed them to other people. So they took all these little I got back and I'm like, nothing is divided nicely needed. The first person who got it took all those things out. And so don't waste your time doing that if it's not needed. And so I would say, talk to whoever that your supervisor is that will be the first person to look at it and know the format that they wanted in, because it probably took 2 days of my time to do this, and it was all for naught. So, I mean, those are simple things. You don't have 2 days to waste on these little tabs.
And I'll add that you should suspect some of those surprises, so getting it done earlier so that when the tenure committee looks at it, you don't feel panicked about having to make some of those adjustments. It's just, it depends on what they prefer, and this is how you have to filter what I say altogether, is because this is my second time being tenured, and so I was on a very short clock here, so I had no idea what Murray required, but I do know I had gotten tenured at the smaller university before I got here. So you've got to filter what I say through that. I was having to prove myself beyond a year here and then my career elsewhere in order to do that. So you have to filter what I say through that. And now this is the first year. We've got another person going up in our department. So I got tenure last year, and so this year I'm actually serving on the tenure committee. So what I have found was interesting about that process altogether is that, and I wish I had thought of this when I had written it and put it together, but that your colleagues in your department and in your college, or the colleagues in your department they're tasked with defending you to the next step up. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to write the document that they have to write and sign, and then when they're sitting in a group of their colleagues, you want them to defend you. So in my mind, the most important people in the process are your colleagues on that committee, that they feel armed, because they've got pressure too, to go to the next committee up and say, this colleague is worthy, we want this, they're sort of staking their reputation on you a little bit too. So to me, that's the most important relationship to keep, and you want them to fight for you up there. So to me, I wrote my document for them so that because I assumed they would read every word of it. I didn't assume everybody else would read every word of it. So that to me was the important thing to remember as I'm writing and who my audience is. But I'm a writer, so I always think of audience first anyway, so you have to filter that too. But
And real quick, one of the
Yeah,
things,
sure.
we'll move on to the next question. One of the things that was helpful for me was to create my packet, but then send it to someone just to kind of really quickly look at it and make sure that I have everything. And I also sent my narratives to folks, make sure it made sense, because it made sense to me, but doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense to everybody. So I just sent it out to folks, and I didn't want to take up too much time from people, so I just shot a narrative here, shot a narrative over there, shot a narrative over here, just to make sure it made sense. And then I asked people to quickly come by and just kind of peruse through the packet as quickly as they could in order to tell me if things look good, if things need to be changed, if the order was okay, and all that stuff. So.
Well, you noticed, well, both of you noted about the narratives. So we have a teaching statement, research narrative, and the service narrative that we have to write. So let's start with the teaching statement, because this is what I think all of us will have to start really focusing on right about now. So tell us about the process that you used in writing your teaching statement. There are a number of different approaches to this. And probably the one that I would think would be one of the most read things in the tenure book.
Mm-hmm.
well, the process for me altogether was I wanted to, and I've said this to my colleagues, I wanted to tell my story. What's my story of being a teacher? What's my story of being a researcher? What's my story of being in service? So I wanted to explain my process. I looked at the whole tenure process as a writing problem. How can I communicate who I am in this amount of time, in this amount of space, to whoever's reading this? So I wanted to talk about my philosophy in the classroom before I then started supporting that with evidence. So I started with actually writing my story. Here's what I want them to know about me. And then I started figuring out how I could support that with evidence. And so that also got me to thinking things like, well, this is how all these things connect then. And then I wanted to connect the research, the service, and the teaching all together, that it's all, I followed Boyer's theory of scholarship, Boyer's scholarship helped me with that too, about how all of those areas are supposed to feed your classroom. And he provided me structure. So that's how I wrote. And like I said, I'm a journalism person, so writing is how I think. I mean, I can't do it without writing it down anyway. So I approached it as a writing problem and what I needed them to know about me.
Very similar. I used my teaching philosophy to provide me the structure, and then from there I used evidence to support what it was that I was trying to do initially anyways. And then I talked briefly about strategies that I implemented in my classrooms. I supported it with evidence from my evaluations. And that's essentially what my teaching narrative was. So it's more so my philosophy, and then the real world sort of stuff that puts the theory into practice.
Mine was our annual eval process every year was essentially handing in our teaching, research, and service narrative, and so mine just evolved from the first year that I was here to the last year that I was here, and so you could look at all 5 of them and see how my teaching had changed. And so by the time I was ready to write my narrative for my tenure packet, I just grabbed the one I handed in January, updated it with any new examples from classroom activities or evaluations from the spring semester, and then really led what I hope my classroom looks like drive my philosophy. If anyone walked into my classroom, I would hope that what I say is my classroom, people would actually see is happening in my classroom.
I would echo everything I said. The one thing I would maybe come back to as well is that since you've all had reviews already, it's not a bad idea to go back and look at your reviews, the letter that was written for you. And, in some cases, there's different pressures put on you throughout the first couple of years you're here. Early on, at least in College of Science, the first year I only taught one class. I got part of a release, and then, my class load picked up. But ultimately, at least in the teaching part of it, we're valued as being effective teachers. So you need to communicate that part. And I think sort of playing up to your strong suits of, we all don't teach the same. So how are you an effective teacher, and can you communicate that? I know I started out the same way. I started out with my philosophy, like what do I try to do in the classroom, and then I brought in some of the evaluations and talked about how I incorporate my research. Maybe actually give a specific example of something that I did, and there was even cases where I included some of the actual evaluations. I put them in there, and somewhere along the line they got taken out of the packet, and I don't know where they went, but it doesn't matter. But the point is, I think sort of echoing what you said, you need to really show, what you're communicating is to your colleagues and peers that, hey, I'm an effective teacher. Here, my teaching evaluations say this, the students say this is how I'm doing it, X, Y, and Z. You kind of need to get that story told in an effective way. But looking back at your annual reviews, if there's something in there that, one thing that being on the other side of the fence and being on the tenure committee that I guess I didn't realize before I had gone up for tenure was that there were some messages in there that were maybe more subtle or maybe more direct and explicit than I thought. I kind of said, oh, well, heck, I'm doing a great job, I'm kind of happy-go-lucky anyways. But anyway, looking back at it, I thought, gosh, there was maybe some things where the tenure committee, I don't know, maybe they were, I could have done better in some areas, but maybe addressing, like, here's the things that have changed since I've been here, where I realized maybe I wasn't, or I'm more effective because I realize that I'm just bad at this part of it, or I'm really good at this, or after certain evaluations, student evaluations, I've changed the way I handle X, Y, and Z. In doing that, you're effectively telling them, hey, I've learned also from how to, sort of evolve through the process.
And I do think that's an important point, is that it's okay, it's statistically impossible for all of us to be the best teachers ever on Murray State's campus. You just can't do it. So recognizing your own challenges and how you have tried to address those challenges, I think, is an important part of your narrative as well. So it's okay if one semester your evaluations were bad. You can look at that. You should look at that honestly, and it's much easier for you to write that, right? It's hard to say, I'm the greatest thing ever, and not necessarily feel like you're the greatest thing ever. So I think that is really an important part of the process, is saying, well, I did have challenges, here were my challenges, and here's how I've addressed my challenges.
And addressing those challenges, you could include, if you ever attend Faculty Development Center workshops,
Yes.
Things like that. That does show that you're trying to make the effort to address whatever weaknesses that you might have, and that could be instrumental for you. Any questions so far before we move on? Like I said, this should be also, if you have any questions, just jump in. I want this to be as dynamic as possible for you, because this is all for you.
Typically, how long are the narratives for each of the three sections?
I was told a page.
Okay.
So we were told different things. I've been told at one time 2 pages.
I was told to try and keep mine to a page. Yep.
Very small font, right?
Yeah, real
I
small.
made mine.
Like 11 point.
Yeah, I think
a
I
page.
made mine to 10 for my research. I think everything else was 11 to my research.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine didn't follow any of those patterns. I have 9 pages altogether of the self-narrative. It all went up front, and it has an introduction, a statement of teaching, statement of scholarship, and statement of service, and it was 9 pages altogether.
But that included your previous institution, right? Because you were
For the,
providing-
I summarized yes, basically,
Just wanted to check.
yeah,
For those who are bringing in service
Yeah.
credit from other institutions,
Yeah.
that's the important point.
yes, because, well, and when you're looking at, I mean, you know, most departments, my department did this, and I'm sure, you know, they take it easy on service for a little while so that you can do the other two, because there's always gonna be service, right? So, service takes many, many forms beyond, committees too.
Okay. Well, let's move on and talk about the research writing part of this, because we have different, I guess, philosophies on the teaching as to how approaches should be on that. Research, we're not really given a whole lot of insight into. So I don't know if it's a different process from teaching, from writing the teaching statement, or if this is, we just continue along those same lines. Do we throw everything we've ever done scholarly wise into it?
I think it depends how much scholarship you have on your record. It's like, for me, it was, the structure was identifying first and foremost my research focus, and then identifying the pieces that spoke to that research focus. And so I basically, that's kind of how I developed it. There was two pieces to my research focus, and then all the scholarship that went under those two pieces, I spoke about it in a very raw, as raw as I could, in terms of keeping it short, keeping it simple. Yeah. So I didn't get into too much detail as far as findings or anything like that.
Right.
Title and a quick synopsis.
Okay.
And mine was even more basic than that. It was a paragraph of my research focus and how it's changed because of my teaching here, which it has. And then a list of my publications and a paragraph about the work that I'm doing and so my next two publications. And it was not even synopsis, just here's the type, I literally pulled it off my CV. So if they wanna go find it, well, it's in the folder anyway, but if they want the citation is there. Which was why mine was able to, it was just over a page, mostly just because of the list of publications.
Okay.
One thing I'd maybe add is that in my research narrative, I did include, part of it was just purely cut and dry, quantitative. These are the publications, the copies are on the back. These were the grants that I applied for. These were which were funded. These ones were not. Dollar amounts, the whole bit. I did also put in there maybe some of the, I don't know, not less quantitative, but the projects that graduate students and undergraduate students completed and presented at Scholars Week or meetings or whatever it is in there. And so, and that part, so one challenging part I had was sort of where do you draw the line between teaching and where you mention those students in your teaching narrative, and then where they come in on the research part. And I know a couple times I said, well, the first thing that they're going to read is the teaching part, so I'll include them there. And then I thought, well, no, but it makes a nice story if I can include them in the research part, because I can sort of tie them to the grants I've applied to. And so ultimately, I kind of divvied it up a little bit in both ways, maybe less explicitly mention names or numbers of students in the teaching part, but then sort of fed that back into the research part of it. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but there was kind of two parts. There was just the cut and dry, these are the publications, these are the grants, this is the dollar amount, and then I also talked about, because I had several students that did undergraduate research. Some didn't, they produced no scholarly product. Other than that, they just got experience. But then others did, so I sort of, kind of outlined that a little bit in a paragraph or two.
I treated the letter as like a cover letter for my Vita. So I pointed out in my cover letter which things I wanted to focus on in my Vita, because my Vita has a complete list of all of my scholarships, so I sort of directed them on what I wanted them to pay attention to and how that was being used. So mine was very narrative. And other people in our department had lists as well, but I used my Vita as my extensive list, and then my narrative part is just saying, now look at this, because this is what was important here, here, and here, and this is
Okay. So in our research statements, because research in a lot of ways helps to drive our teaching, and it should be the backbone of our teaching, then we can definitely try to maybe connect the two in some way. So what about the service statement? Seems like that might be the hardest one to write, I don't know. Or is that another listing as well?
For me, it was a listing.
Okay.
I just basically went down the chart, service to university, service to college, service to department, service to profession, and highlighted the ones where I felt like I put in the most hours. You know what I mean? So it
Okay.
wasn't all of my service, but I did I did have an introduction that said I'm just highlighting the ones that are, what did I say? I've highlighted below some of my professional activities since my first semester at MSC. So I didn't even give a reason. I just basically said I'm highlighting some of them.
Okay.
And, but the ones that I highlighted were the ones that I chaired or co-chaired, you know what I mean? So the ones that asked more of me.
Anything different with anybody else that you might recall, or that's basically how it probably should go? Well, let's kind of jump ahead a little bit. Let's talk about, because a lot of us in here, when we go up for, apply for tenure, we're also applying for our promotion. So what are some differences between the two application processes? Can we copy what we did for our tenure and put in promotion, or should they be treated differently?
Mine were exactly the same. I took out the needs of the university statement that was in my tenure packet
Yeah,
and ran it through the photocopier.
yes, as did I.
Why you don't need that?
The needs of the university is only for tenure. The needs of the university narrative, that's just for the tenure packet. That's not needed for the promotion.
What's the reason for that?
Good question.
It's just not part of the packet itself. I don't know. It's not.
Because they don't need you to be promoted, a tenure, I would assume, this is what I'm thinking, they don't need you to be promoted, they need you to be tenure. You know, that need is about tenure,
Yeah.
promotion is about you.
Right. But Echo, you did bring up a good point again, and the needs of the university, for me, I found it the most difficult thing to write
okay.
about.
Yes.
It was kind of like I just basically said everything that I needed to say in the first three narratives, and now the fourth narrative is basically, without saying them in those words, but like, why does the university need me? Like, why do I need to keep my job here? So that was, and I'm really bad at selling myself in the first place anyway, so that was a hard narrative for me to write. But basically, I just this is where really the digital measures really helped me, because I was able to identify all the things that I've done, how I've changed it, how I've helped the program, helped the department, and pick those things, identify things within that, and structured my my narrative for that particular.
Things you do that no one else in your department does, like classes that you can teach that no one else might be able to teach, is really helpful in that section.
Yeah, and even, I would say too that, you know, highlighting the classes that you teach that are part of a program that is, you know, for example, a lot of the classes that I teach are in the realm of aquatic ecology, and we have a fisheries aquatic sciences degree. And there's probably 2 or 3 of us in the department that could probably teach a lot, you know, a lot of the courses, and some of them we overlap, but we can't teach them all. And so I recall in that needs part, I said, well, I've covered 3, you know, of the courses that are required for this degree. And although, you know, there's other people that possibly could teach it, they're filling in these other classes, you know, sort of thing. So, and these are, you know, in highlighting those things, you are, I mean, I think you're sort of highlighting, well, this is, you know, you couldn't just take me off the faculty and keep the degree, you know, I mean, that's the sort of the reality. And you're not saying that, but that's what you're saying. You know? And that was at least for the teaching part, where I sort of went through those courses that I had been teaching that no one else was teaching at the same time.
Anything you want to add?
I didn't mind saying anything. I like that. I'm the only PhD in the public relations area, so I said that. Our department was in need of women, so I said that. I advise more students than anybody else, so I said that.
So you just find some niches about yourself that nobody else in your department has. was. So for each of these statements, were they about a page or two in length? I know you said you had 9 total, right?
Yeah, mine was a narrative. I put that in the
Complete
beginning of
narrative,
the book and the
okay.
whole thing. They took it out, and I swear that's the only thing they looked at was the narrative itself. And I said that at the last time. I know they looked at the whole thing but they did the same thing. They tore it all apart. I mean, people had taken bits and pieces out of it, but the thing that was completely missing was my narrative and my vita, and it was. And I have a student worker in the provost office. She said, "Yeah, I distributed that." So she had copied and distributed it all. So I knew that's that everybody surely got, and then they'd have to come and look at this. So.
Okay.
Did you ever get that back?
Nope.
I was just curious.
I don't have my tenure letter. I put my original tenure letter from my last university in there. I don't have that anymore.
I was just curious, because I didn't actually look at my packets until I was just coming over here, and I was like, oh, I have
No,
I
it's
have
all
no
missing.
narratives. So
I have no
never in my
narratives.
computer, but I was like, oh, they're not even in here.
I didn't get my tenure folder back. I got my promotion folder back, but the only thing that was in it were the tabs.
You're really
So I
helpful.
filled it in. I copied it. I mean, I printed stuff out again and filled it in for you guys. But
Yeah, so make sure you really put in
Yeah.
copies, that way
Well,
they're
that
lost.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I went up for promotion after 1 year here and up for tenure after 2 years here. And so I saw that they took that all out of my promotion, so I couldn't just duplicate. I had to reconstruct some things for my tenure, and I did not have the tenure letter anymore either. And so this time I made copies of everything they took out, and they still, the copies are gone and the stuff in the actual book are gone. So I don't know why they take it apart or what they do, but even making copies of it did not make. Well, just leave it intact.
So, think about back to the process, I guess, when you started this maybe in May before you went up for tenure, or maybe even throughout that year before you went up for tenure. What were some headaches, if any? I mean, were there any headaches that you might have encountered that we might need to get the medicine prepared for?
I had to have tabs, and quite frankly, getting tabs to print on the stupid little template
Yeah.
so that I could fold them was the most painful process,
Yeah,
part of this
it was hard.
entire
That right there was the hardest part of the whole thing.
Yes. Honestly.
yes.
And standing in Staples and figuring out which tabs you're gonna use, and how many you're gonna need,
Yeah,
was
and
pretty difficult.
I know it seems silly too, but I can echo that point because surprisingly, even though they didn't use the tabs in this, but if you don't get the right tabs with the right dividers, when you walk across campus, the little tabs will actually fall out of the little dividers, and you've just spent, a week trying to get them in there. Anyway, so you might want to put a little piece of super glue or a little, when you stick it in, I don't know what to do.
That's good. That's a good idea.
Find out if you need them or not, because it'd be great if you didn't, then you would never have to mess with them.
Well, mine was all tied to my narrative. So you read my narrative and it says Artifact 1. So you turn to Artifact 1 and there it is, which is gone. Artifact 2 and 3 are 1 and 2 are gone. So I didn't have this in 3 different sections. I mean, it was all tied to the narrative, and you get to a parentheses where it says artifact, and you could go to the artifact tab. So that really figuring out, again, you're telling your story, so figuring out how to tell your story so that they will read it and understand it. To me, it was just all about the audience, and because they don't know me, and I didn't have a chance for them to get to know me. So I wanted to figure out how, like I said, it was all about the audience and how I could tell my story that took place on Murray State's campus in 2 years.
And try and find someone from your department who's gone up for tenure within the last couple of years and look at their binder, because they're the ones who've most recently gone through the exact same committee members, except they got added to the group that you're going through. And so you'll know what the expectations are. I couldn't have written a narrative like Marcy did. Mine had to be on those 3 separate sheets, and it had to be very clearly delineated. There would have been like marching up and down the hall going, Danielle, you have to redo this, had I just written a complete narrative.
nobody had been tenured in my department for the previous 8 years. I was the first one in 8 years to be tenured in my department. So I had zero example, except that I had, the last university had a very strict way in which they wanted this done. And I've never seen that, and this is my third university, but I've never seen strict guidelines like I had at the last university, and that was very, very helpful to me to doing it here, because nobody ever has strict guidelines, and each department is different. I've sat in this room right here talking about future evaluations and that sort of thing too, and find again that every department does that differently too. So, you know, we don't have the two different evaluations in our department, and we've got, you know, a new chair this time. So, you know, right as they're going through it this time, halfway through, they get a new chair, which also throws everything off. So in my mind, it was about getting all the information you can, just like you tell students with resumes, get all the information you can and then see what applies best to what you can do.
And look at your college handbook. Like
Yeah.
the Humanities and Fine Arts
Gotta
handbook
check that
has
out.
very, very clear instructions for what tabs are supposed to be in your binder and the order they go in. I'm just telling my lovely Humanities and Fine Arts friends who are in the room right now.
Yeah.
They're there, they're
Yep.
clear. Good. Use them.
One thing that Marcy said reminded me, being on the tenure committee now and you know, reading my colleagues' papers or, you know, statements before we meet, one thing that I would suggest for you to do is to, when you write your narrative, let's say that you're gonna make a comment about your ABC reports or something like that, your grade, your evaluations or whatever it is. Don't just reference it in the packet, because that makes me have to go and page through to find it. At least tell me what's in there. Like, you know, you can say, you know, you know, you could run the string of averages or something like that, so I don't have to go look at it and calculate it. You know, you can, I mean, it's just good referencing. You know, you need all your ABC packets in there, but spell those things, spoon feed it to me in your limited one-page space, you know. Because there's some that don't do that, and it kind of, you're like, well, I can't really learn anything from reading your narrative. And I mean, I don't think anyone would do that, but just be explicit about it.
Look at people's narratives. I think we already talked about that. I just want to stress that even more. Look at people's narratives, see how they've developed it, see how they've written about themselves in those narratives, and then use that as a point of reference for when you guys are developing your own narratives. Because especially if they've recently gone through the process and kind of know what it is that passes. Yeah.
And Bella Azuma and I went up at the same time in our, for tenure at the same time in our department. And her narrative looks completely different than my narrative. And I think hers sort of matches up better with what you all are saying too, so. That's very comforting, I know, but really it's about you, so I still say every time, write what makes sense to you and to what you think your audience needs to know about you.
Are there size requirements on the notebooks? I think from time to time, some faculty ask about that. I see they're varying sizes, and I just didn't know if there's anything written somewhere that maybe we need to go off to Office Depot and start buying.
I wanted something like that. Though I'm not great at selling myself, I did want to show off what I did. And so I actually created a decent sized dossier, and then, so I guess a headache, not a huge headache, but a minor headache, was that it came back to me and I was like, take all this stuff out and create a supplement just in case people ask, because we just want the bare bones. It's like, oh, like, all right. Look, I felt bad because I created this thing and it was nice and fat, and I was like, oh man, now it's this.
Samir, what was it that made it fat? Like the actual published article?
Exactly,
Your
yeah.
presentation?
Yeah. Narratives from students and things of that nature that I wanted to include in their emails that I made copies of, printed out, and I said, nope, take all that stuff out.
Yeah, and I made copies of, like, I made whole copies. Well, not whole copies, but I mean, I wanted them to see the journal that it was in. It didn't necessarily have every page of the journal depending, but I made copies of all of that to make sure it looked like a journal article. It didn't just look 8.5 by 11 page.
So yeah, for us, it's, for the college event, it's this, maybe a little bit bigger.
Yeah,
For
I'm
the
in
tenure,
College of Business,
This is my
so,
promotion, so
yeah.
tenure was a little bit thicker. I think, what is this, 1 inch? So I think my tenure was 1.5, maybe 2 inches.
Just to kind of, I guess, wrap us up then a little bit, unless there are some questions from faculty. Maybe what are some things that you wish you had known a year or two in advance prior to starting all of this? Or if we maybe touched based on that?
That's the only one I got blank. 'Cause I feel like, for me anyways, just personally speaking, that the department did a really good job in terms of preparing me.
Okay, good.
And so I really wasn't left in, I knew what was expected of me, and so I did it. I've met with folks on 2 times a year, and so I really felt like I had a good footing. Although I've heard
Sure.
stories from other folks, not from this college, but from my colleagues from other universities, that they didn't know anything, and
Right.
so their whole process was just a mystery. And so until they went up, and then they were told that they didn't get it or they got it, and they were like, "It's relief," or well, why? I didn't know what to expect, and so.
I could recite the faculty handbook section on tenure. I had it, I highlighted it at least 3 times, read it and highlighted it differently at least 3 times. I'm telling you, I could right now go do a speech, a poetic interpretation of the faculty handbook tenure section.
So, I mean, I would just say that talk, communicate, converse with the folks in your department, and that's probably the best way to make sure you're on solid ground.
So is this the process from the department and then to the college and then to the university?
Mhm.
So if the department has different requirements, you do the same way that your department or the college asks for. Then when it goes to the university, it's different. So how do you do that?
Well, I was told that it's really the department and the college that really sets the tone. So as long as you're solid with them, then everything else should follow suit.
Okay.
And those people are the ones that defend you to that. So I know my first time around, Dr. White even told me, he said he went armed with our accreditation tab, and when they questioned something like creative pieces, work in journalism and mass communication, so he would even, and what he did was he counted up the number. So he said, this is how many publications she had, this is how many creative things she had, this is how many, I mean, he did all of that. And then he said, when they questioned the creative stuff, he said, well, according to our ACE JMC accreditation, that definitely counts for tenure and accreditation in the journalism mass comm program. So it's all about him defending me. And same thing, Bella is on the committee that defends to the university, and she did the same thing with a colleague that's going up this year, is that she said, here's, here, how am I supposed to defend him? Tell me what I need to say to defend him. And we, as a committee, sat down and said, here's why we defend him.
So do what the college asks.
Well, not even I'm in a journalism program, and you're in an OrgCom program in a college of business. Those are completely different areas. So it was all about my department being able to defend me to the college. And Dr. White had experience with that, so I trusted him. He asked me questions that he needed to ask, and then I knew that he knew how to deal with the College of Business.
But the handbook, college handbook is
Mhm.
the same.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
yes. So we memorized that.
Anything y'all want to add?
If you're not good at bookkeeping, start early.
Yeah.
Like, if you know you're not organized and don't know where your stuff is, try now
Make it a
to
weekend
find your
project.
stuff and move semester by semester.
That's a great point.
I'm hyper organized, and so it made things a lot easier for me because I already had everything in reverse chronological order, and so I knew where everything was. But I live with someone who is not organized, and so I know what that looks like from a filing standpoint. So if you are not an organized person, do yourself a favor.
That's a great point, and that also reminds me, know yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
I like to procrastinate, so if that's your forte as well, then don't procrastinate, you know? Be mindful of the deadline to get packets submitted, and make sure you create a pseudo deadline for yourself, which is
Yeah.
maybe 2 weeks out prior to the real deadline.
So what would be a good timeline, like an ideal timeline to go through this process?
Well,
When did you start gathering everything? Was it 2 months prior to?
Summertime.
So
Summertime.
summertime
Yeah.
was the time.
yeah.
Summertime, I really started hitting it and making sure that I had everything, and starting my narratives and all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, after I turned in grades in May, I really did spend, because I was teaching this summer, those last 2 weeks of May before teaching started, to put everything together. And tenure packets are due September 1st, and our chair wants to look over our packets before they go to the committee.
That's true.
And so I had my stuff to her by the 15th of August, so she could have time to look over it, and I would have time to finish it as we were busy with school starting and classes starting. And so, and that 2 weeks leeway worked out really well, because it let me get anything fixed that I needed fixed. And
So you might want to communicate with your chair and see if that might be a similar process. Michael, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I recall the same as now that I think back, our chair wanted it, you know, the deadline was September 1st, but our chair wanted it 2 weeks prior. And there was actually, I can't remember what it was. Well, it was the double-sided thing. That, you know, I had printed it off double-sided thinking, oh, I'm gonna save some trees. And they're like, immediately like, no, go back and print it single-sided. Because, just like you said, someone was gonna make copies of it, and it was on something that couldn't, you know, double-side print, so I just went back and reprinted everything single-sided. And, but had I not turned it in early or whatever, that, I mean, no one's probably gonna be that much of a stickler, but you'd hate to have all this come down to that, double-sided print.
Well, everybody, I have never met anybody going through tenure who thought, I got this. When you're writing it, I mean, you go through, I am the greatest thing in the whole wide world to, oh my God, I suck. They're never gonna give me tenure. I mean, I went up and down that twice. I'd gotten tenure somewhere else, and still I had those same sleepless nights. And so everybody has that. Everybody feels like they're the greatest, and then that they're the worst, and then I got this, and then, oh, I don't know, they might not tenure me, sort of thing. So knowing that that's normal, I think helps. It certainly did me the second time around, recognizing that, Marcy, this is about tenure, this is not about you as a teacher, so stop it, sort of thing. That helped me the second time around, because I had already done all of that. And as I talked to other people in my department, and, I mean, you know, they're the same things. I can be as confident as I can be that they're gonna get tenure, but they're not confident of that, so. And nobody can guarantee it anyway, so.
That's true. Any other last comments from up here? Any questions that you all might have? I want to give us time to, they have brought some materials in case you would like to peruse those real quickly to maybe gain some sort of visual, if you will. I think that does help from time to time. Of course, you know, I think like a lot of them have indicated, you do want to communicate with your department and make sure that there's not a protocol already in place. Maybe they want things done a certain way. But nevertheless, it still helps to have those visuals, that way you can have some understanding. Thank you all so much. I hope you all gained something from this, and then good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I put my card in here if you want any of my narratives or anything like that. Feel free to email me. I'll just shoot them to you.
Yes.
So,